And welcome to our February live stream event. If someone in the chat could let me know that my mic is working and not have a repeat of last time where I went on chatting to you all and you couldn't hear me. So, I'll just wait until someone says something. Maybe. Anyway, it looks like it's on. So, unfortunately, we have to cancel one of our talks tonight. Unfortunately, Louise had some issues getting her talk ready for tonight. So we're going to have just two talks tonight, one from Nathan and one from Tom. And Louise will return to our live series next month to give her talk on the converting of the closed mangle to a printing press. So our first speaker will be Nathan, who's going to be talking about his recent involvement in letterwork and how he made a recent letter bookmark. So I'll pass it over to Nathan and we'll get started.
Hello fellow makers, I'm going to be showing you today how to make your very own leather stamped bookmark. This is going to be a great little project that just about anyone can get involved in if they have some basic leather working tools. I got into leatherworking making some metro props. I started on some really simple stuff, slightly stitching, and I've slowly kind of built up what I'm working on. As I got bigger and bigger projects, I wanted to go back to the basics during the quarantine to make some pretty easy and pretty enjoyable bookmarks that I could give to my friends and family. So follow along, and if you want to make one as well, I'm going to be giving you a full list of everything you're going to need and some of the great places you can get some tools, because people often ask me, where do you get your tools? Where do you get your leather? And I'm going to give you a full list of everything you're going to need. So stay tuned and find out. Before we start, we're going to need plenty of tools. Now, most of these tools are going to be pretty starter friendly, and you can pick them up on Amazon, through leather stores, AliExpress, eBay. I've been doing most of this since the quarantine, so just about everything I've gotten, I've pretty much got online. So let's go through some of the tools now.
First thing you're going to need is a groover to get all those fine lines. Then a beveler, and next up all your burnishing tools. One electric, one manual. Next up is your hole punch to punch right through the leather. Then a good selection of sharp knives. You're going to need this to punch through. Then a nice set of stamps. And finally a hammer, some contact cement, and a good hammering surface.
So for this project, we're going to need two types of leather. There are pretty much two types of leather when you really get down to it. There's veg tan leather, and then there's chromium tan leather. So if you're looking around your house now and you see some upholstered furniture or some leather clothes, chances are that's chromium tan leather. I'm going to show you some now. So chromium tan leather is this, much more shiny, much more processed. So during the tanning process, what happens is this is treated with very, very heavy chemicals, most notably, as you can imagine, chromium. And this basically strips an awful lot out of it and kind of gives it a much more processed look. It's much more effective, it's much quicker, and the chemical and the damage done to the leather is not substantial. It doesn't make it worse, it's just different. So for things like this, you wouldn't really tool them, you couldn't really stamp them or carve intricate patterns into it, but you could make a bag out of it, you could wrap it around a sofa, you could do just about anything with this. Most of the leather you think of chromium tan. When you smell it more processed. It smells an awful lot more processed, like it's just come from a factory. So that's chromium tan leather. And so that's when we're going to be using a little bit of this. And then you have veg tan leather. Now veg tan leather, let's just get this open here. Veg tan leather is a naturally processed leather. This is part of a massive piece that I recently bought. Well, it was an awful lot bigger when I originally got it. And it's a side of a cow. And this is basically the natural stuff. This is exactly how it came from the animal. It's been naturally tanned with stuff that's coming from trees. It takes an awful lot longer, but you get a leather that's been undyed, untooled, and you can pretty much do anything with it. So when we're actually working on our bookmark, we're going to be able to use this to stamp or to carve. And then for the chromium tan leather, what we'll be able to do is we'll be able to add a nice process back to it. All right, guys, we've got our tools, we've got our leather. Let's get straight into it.
We start out by measuring out how big we want the bookmark. I went 20 centimeters by 6 centimeters. You use a little awl to just measure it out and just cut small little lines. We don't want to hurt the leather, but we just want to be able to see it for when we go back with the knife. Look at those fine lines. You can see it perfectly, all ready to be cut. The awl is perhaps the most useful leatherworking tool you can possibly imagine. It's literally a pointed metal stick, and it is the best thing you'll ever use. It creates little holes for when you're stamping, it marks edges, it just opens things up. You'd be so surprised at something so silly as a little metal awl can make all the difference when it comes to leatherworking. That's why I absolutely love it. It's my favorite leatherworking tool, because you'd be nowhere without it. You really would be nowhere without this little piece of pointed metal. Take your ruler now, and we're going to start cutting out the leather. Take nice, easy strokes. You don't want to go too hard on this. You don't want to damage it more than you have to. Take easy strokes, hit it a few times, and you'll finally punch through. Leather can be quite tough, so make sure you're using a strong blade and change those blades out regularly. You don't want to be doing this 10 times, 13 times, 14 times. It'll ruin the whole look. Make sure you just do a final cut. Make sure you get those edges nice and straight. Now it's time to take the beveler. The beveler is used to take off the hardness of the edges and smooth it out so it's nice rolling edges. This is a really enjoyable part of the process, and a beveler will never see you wrong. Take your time and enjoy it. Once we have our lines beveled, we take out the groover. The groover is usually used to put down nice clean lines that you can then track in little holes for stitching. But in this case, we're just going to do it because it looks pretty sweet. Take it, lay it down somewhere pretty hard, and then run the groover easily over it. Make sure you change it out regularly, because a dull blade like the one we had here does not lead to good results. Unfortunately, I hadn't changed out the blade in a while, and you can see it actually did a bit of damage. We'll still keep going, but I'll better make sure I change out those blades in future. Once that's done, we apply a little bit of water to all the edges, and we're going to start burnishing. Burnishing is essentially heat on the leather, which essentially polishes it and hardens it up. Otherwise, you have really fleshy ends to everything, and it's not going to work well. Here we're using the manual version to heat it up and basically seal in that edge. You can use a manual version or apply a little bit of water and hit it again with an electric one. I personally swear by the electric one attached to my Dremel, and I use it all the time. It gives a great polished edge. There's an entire art in burnishing, and on lots of other projects this could take 10 or 13 other steps, but right now we're going to do it nice and simple. A short word on stamps. Stamps are a nightmare, and you're going to make a lot of noise, and you've got to make sure you have a very, very solid surface to stamp on. So if you're just stamping on an uneven surface or a not hard surface, you're not going to get in deep. So the core requirement for stamping on leather is you need a very, very solid surface. An awful lot of people use quartz or chopping boards. I'm using a piece of acrylic, very, very thick acrylic that basically can take a good wallop. And then you want to wet your leather. So make it nice and moist. You don't want to soak it, because soaking leather can do a bit of damage. But you want to make it nice and moist, and then you start the stamping process. So let's get stuck into that. So now we have our leather. We have our burnished edges, we've beveled the sides, we've added a little divot here, which is nice, and an awful lot of these, I really should have changed the blade, but that'll probably clean up an awful lot better once we dye it. But now, let's get into stamping. So we want to get a little bit of water, and just get the leather moist. You can see it'll just suck it right up, and we'll get the whole thing going. Once you've moistened it up, take your stamp, find the letters you want, get it right in order, place it down in your leather firmly, get a good hold, and then hammer it down until you finally get it in. You want a deep imprint, but not too deep that you go all the way through. That's just about perfect. you really need to make sure that you have a strong surface to hammer on, because you're going to be pushing deep into the leather. If you have a movement or you underestimate it, you can do some serious damage. So really take your time and plan out each and every hammer blow. Another part of this project that we can work on is using some stamps. Now, an awful lot of these stamps, it's actually quite helpful to heat them up first, put them on then a wet surface, and then just smash them down as hard as you possibly can. Otherwise, they tend to go down, but they don't really have that crisp outline. So we've got our stamp, we've got our lighter. That's just about, needs a little bit more water. Give that a little bit more water. Let it soak in. And then we'll just light this up. Stamps are a great way to work with leather. You can get them in all different types. You can 3D print them. You can custom order them. There's so many different variations, and an awful lot of sculptures and carving work are actually done with stamps. You wouldn't think, you think they're done like with lasers or something like that, but an awful lot of it's just different stamps done over and over and over and over again to kind of give it different effects. It's really, really beautiful. So that should be heated up now. We don't want to get too hot because the whole thing's metal and conducts heat. We'll place it down. Just going to hit it. Beautiful. To dye the piece, what we're going to use is we're going to use some EcoFlow Evening Blue. Now I've already mixed this up a little bit with a little bit of water and a little bit of dye. This kind of leather dye, it goes a long way. And if you're working with this kind of stuff, you need to be really, really careful, because it will literally get everywhere. It will literally get everywhere. So you need to be really, really careful. Gloves on, because, well, as I discovered myself, you are a human being. And your skin is essentially one step off leather. So if you get leather dye on your skin is now dyed and it's not coming out for an awful long time. So it's important to make sure you glove up, make sure you have a clear area. I've got a working mat here and we're going to dye it now. All right, guys, stay tuned. So we're going to take a little sponge, dip into the dye, a small amount, and we're going to go short controlled bursts. A bit more dye in there. Don't need that much. Let's make sure we get our edges. Oh, they're gorgeous. Okay, now let's hit it again. I want to build up the layers here. So go for a stronger layer now. Get that in there this time. We don't need to do the bottom, because we're going to be covering that up with a bit of another type of leather. Yeah, just get all this in. Get a nice deep coat on this, because it'll dry a little lighter. Now that we have our little leather bookmark dyed, next thing we need to do is put a top coat over it to basically seal in all that dye. You get water on this and this dye is going to go everywhere, so we don't want that, and we also want to give it a nice protective sheen. Now what you can do here is you can condition it. This will soften up the leather and give it a bit of longevity, but the other problem is that it's going to soften up the leather, and I want this to be quite stiff to obviously sit in the book and to not be all floppy woppy. So we're not going to condition it, we're going to go straight to putting a top coat on it. Now for a top coat, what I like to use is Resolene. This stuff is the best stuff you can possibly use. There's other brands out there, but there is nothing quite as good as Resolene. You can get it from the Dublin Leather Store, you can get it on Amazon, you can pretty much get it anywhere, and it's absolutely incredible. So basically seals in the leather, gives it a nice kind of gloss coat, and really adds a layer of detail to it. Let's stick a coat on now. Just apply some nice even coats. Resolene is a brilliant material. You can get it in the Dublin Leather Store, and it gives the best finish I found on leather products. It's just perfect. I absolutely love this stuff. you can see how the top coat of Resolene has really brought in a bit of gloss and really finished out that dye job, making it look next level. So while we're waiting for the Resolene to dry and we get that beautiful top coat on our leather, we want to back the leather with some chromium tan that we talked about before. So the idea of this is obviously the backside of leather, unless it's properly burnished and tanned, it's always going to be quite rough. It's the flesh side of the leather, so it's always going to be quite rough. Now you can burnish it and spend hours doing that, but that's quite a complicated process and takes quite a while, although I've seen some people do it very, very quickly. What we can do though is we can add a backing of it with freely available chromium tan, and you can see you kind of have that lovely pattern, you've got that lovely colour. These have all come from the tannery, pre-dyed, pre-done. But the only thing is obviously, as it being chromium tan, you can't really tool this in the same way that we could have done with our veg tan. So we couldn't have put in designs, we couldn't have beveled edges and all the rest of it. It would just kind of fall apart. But what's great about chromium tan is it's great for finishes. It's great for sticking on the back of things. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay this out, we're going to cut out a little pattern, and then we're going to get ready to stick it on with contact cement. So here we have our chromium tan. So let's get our on here. Now we've waited about 15-20 minutes. The first coat of Resolene is done and we have our backing cut out. So what we're going to do now is we're going to put one last coat of Resolene on it, let that dry for about an hour, and then we're going to attach the back on with some contact cement. Contact cement is a brilliant tool to use. You want to apply a thin layer on both the surfaces and leave it for about 10 to 15 minutes before you join the two together. If you don't wait, it'll go down tacky and it won't work well. But if you do wait, make sure that we line these pieces up perfectly. You get it wrong, it'll stick and harden instantly. So you want to get it perfectly. You want to really get one shot at this.
That's dried. Take our scissors and we're going to cut out all around here, removing the excess chromium tan. And we'll just be very, very careful not to get in on the actual veg tan leather, because we don't want to cut that up or else we'll have to re-dye it and it'll be a nightmare. So we'll just go very, very slowly and we'll just start cutting.
Use the hole punch to punch a hole right through the leather and the chromium tan. That'll give us plenty of room for our tassels.
So for the tassel, I've got some buffalo hide rope. I think I picked this up in Sostren and Gren in Dublin, so you can just go in and you can pick some up. I don't think it's only a couple of euro, and it's quite good, and it's actually nice, makes a nice little tassel. So we'll measure out a small bit. We don't need a huge amount, about 10 centimeters, thereabouts. And take our scissors, snip, and then we have our perfect piece. We will take our bookmark, get it just like that, twist it, take the loop end, put it through the hole we just made, bring it up, then take the two other ends, and then that just locks it into place. And then to make sure they don't go anywhere, we'll tie two small loops, and they'll just look great. And there we go. So overall, I'm pretty happy with it. It came together quite well. The only kind of issues I had is when I did these sort of edges, the tool was a little bit dull. I have to replace that. It's only a minor thing, I just never did it when I started this. And my lettering, as you can see here on the together, went a little bit over. And that can be really difficult when you're using hand tools. Sometimes you have to make sure you get it perfectly, and unfortunately, I didn't get it perfectly here. But that's okay. Sometimes a couple of little issues, that's fine. It adds to the character of it. Guys, I really hope you enjoyed this. This was just a fun little project that if you have some basic leather working tools, you can do this. It's a bit of veg tan, a bit of chromium tan, a bit of buffalo hide, and then basic tools and a couple of finishing dies. That's all it is. I hope you guys really enjoyed this. If you have any questions for me or you want to ask about any other crafts or creations, please hit me up afterwards and we'll go through it. Guys, have a great day.
And thanks, Nathan. It's very interesting to get an introduction to a whole new craft and hear about all the different tooling and the different knowledge and skills that go into it. So if you would like to ask Nathan any questions, please put your questions in the YouTube chat, and we will have a live Q&A with Nathan and Tom once all the talks are finished. I'll read out your questions. Any interests you have about his materials or what he works on, just pop them into the chat box. So up next we have a talk from Tom Murphy, who's going to talk about embracing failure and how it relates to making in general, with a talk called Fail It, You Make It. Next up.
Hello, my name is Tom Murphy, and in this quick talk I want to discuss our sometimes questionable relationship with failure. It's a relationship that's not uniquely Irish, but it's certainly embedded in the Irish psyche at some level. This may resonate with some of you, or you might find it obvious, but either way I hope to prompt you to re-examine your own approach to making. And if not, there's some pretty pictures of my wood turnings along the way. So, when I went to school, this was our relationship with failure. This is a pass-fail dichotomy, and as many of you are aware, making it very much falls under the auspices of try. Failure, as Adam Savage would say, is always an option. There aren't many of you that will remember this personally, but when I went to school, if you failed, you got hit with a stick. You learned pretty quickly that not failing was more important than succeeding well. The effort was put into definitely not failing as opposed to trying to succeed beyond the expectation. So this is a better diagram of the relationship we should have with failure. You try something, maybe you fail, maybe you go back to trying something else, maybe you fail again, you keep try, fail until you go try success. But I'm a mathematician, so this is far too simplistic a diagram. This is much more like it. For n larger than 0 or equal to 0, there's a number of failures before you eventually get to success. This is really the maker's approach to things. And I wanted to talk about 4 different lessons that come out of this sort of idea of failure, this sort of relationship with failure. So the first is that success can lead to failure. So I'm turning now 4 years. I started in 2016, and in my first year as a first-year turner, I won my local chapter's Turner of the Year award, an award that takes 10 months to compete for, and it had never been won before by a novice turner, a first-year turner. I went on to compete nationally, which is pretty much unheard of for a first-year turner, and that year won the Novice Turner of the Year nationally. Now, wood turners don't do anything quickly, so when you start to compete nationally, you are a novice for 3 years, even just from when you start national competitions. So for a first-year wood turner to come and win it was, again, exceptional. And it was because I was turning stuff that maybe other people weren't. Something I had tried to bring to my work was both an engineering but also an artistic flair. and I'd done very well. I was feted, and lots of people talking about my upcoming work, and the work I would do in the future. The problem with that was I now had something to lose. I had this expectation that I would produce great work, and consequently, my road to success was not becoming a better craftsman, it was winning more often. As a result, I started to make things that were safe, that were competent, certainly technically well made, but not my usual crazy, outlandish, imaginative stuff. My work became boring and safe, and I won nothing in my second year. So I turned success into failure because I was too afraid to try. So lesson two would be that failure can be success. Sometimes failure is the mother of invention. I remember making two friends of mine cups which I wanted to resemble coming out of a piece of bark. Um, I tried my damnedest to form these goblets, and they just didn't look right. They always looked nothing like what I wanted them to be. And so, in anger and to destroy them, I took a circular saw to them and just hacked at them in annoyance with myself, and discovered that actually that looks exactly like the effect I was looking for. Large gouges through the wood, and when sanded, looked just like what I was trying for. So it can happen that failure will bring you to somewhere that you never thought you would get to. To give you another example of this piece here, my instructor turned, and he wasn't happy with the form. It's got some technical flaws in it. It wouldn't be a competition piece, and so he was about to throw it away. And I said, "Give it to me. I want it. It's exactly what I'm looking for to try some painting that I've been thinking about doing." And I gave myself the permission to go into my craftsman's workshop and just fail. Just go in there, and I was going to do nothing that day. I was just going to try stuff out. And unfortunately, this worked out perfectly the first time, which very rarely happens. And I was really happy with it, but it's painted onto a piece that is not particularly well made. It couldn't be a competition piece, but I love it. And this is a time when, if you give yourself the right and the permission to go in to wherever it is you work and fail, that freedom can often bring you to a place that you wouldn't otherwise get to. Um, Lesson three is that creation or making is a goal. That's your goal. Success is a process, and failure is a step in that process. Sometimes failure can be the step that you need to take along that way to bring you to somewhere that's better than where you intended to go. So you can see now that in my work I started to include this stenciling approach that I developed on the previous piece. Just to point out, that wood in the center, the red wood, is actually its color. That's not inked or colored. Wood comes in a variety of wild colors. It's just that in Ireland they're mostly brown. So I started to use it on this sort of uh, lid for a pot. Uh, so it should look like this when it's finished. And unfortunately discovered when I was doing this that the ink or the paint I was using, the lacquered paint, does not react well with the super glue finish that I often use. So there's a situation where failure is painful, but you learn something for it. So probably about 4 or 5 hours of work down the tubes because of a chemical reaction I didn't know about. Um, Adam Savage also says the difference between making and just goofing about is taking notes. And that's important. When you go in and you try something and it doesn't work, it's as important to write that down as it is to write down the successes. You can believe me when I tell you that I will never use super glue again on a lacquered finish. And so let me talk you through one of the processes of one of the pieces I made for the finals. This is a piece of driftwood that a friend brought me, and it was so rotted that I could claw my hand through the right hand side, as you can see there, to form a channel. I generally work with found wood. I don't like to work with wood that's been harvested specifically for the task. There's plenty of wood going around that you can use. But in this case, I've worked with a piece of flotsam and coloured it red, inked it red, just to get it started. So then I put it in a mold, and I poured on top of it red and yellow and orange resin. My thought here was that this piece of wood was really only fit for the fire, I thought initially. And then I thought, well, what if I make it look like it's on fire? And that's where this idea came from. So I started to work on this. So now I have a solid block of wood called a blank. You mount that on the wood turner's lathe and spin it and turn it into a cylinder and turn my workshop into a gay wedding. Then I take that cylinder and I put it in submersed into a different kind of resin and ink, and submit it to half an atmosphere. So that's halfway to space. So I bring it down to 1/2 atmosphere. Now, admittedly, it's the easy half of getting to space, but you leave it there then for several days, so that the resin and the color is forced into the wood. When it comes out again, turn it again, shape it, and you can begin to see the fire coming out of the wood on the left hand side. And then turn a very large cylinder into a very small cylinder to get the stem, and then turn a very thin bowl out of a very small piece of wood, and then cut that into shards. The shards are then glued together into the form of the flower, and the entire thing is polished. So the vase is polished up to a very high reflectivity. Now, the point I'm making here about this is I didn't wake up one day, walk into my workshop, and just start pouring chemicals into containers and pressure flasks and vacuums and molds, etc. If you think that I did this in one day without fail, you're mad. This was the consequence of many frustrating hours of pulling my hair out and trying something and putting stuff into vacuums and putting them into pressure pots and turning them and sanding them and finding out that they chemically react with each other and that didn't work and this didn't work. And we have a tendency in making to show only the success at the end and hide the failures along the way like there's something to be ashamed of. My contention is that there is no success without failure along the way, that nothing that's worth trying to do comes without the chance of failure, and that sometimes failure, that brings you to the most interesting places. By definition, nobody wants to fail. So by definition, failure brings you to somewhere you would never willingly go on your own, and maybe you find something there that moves your art forward. Thanks for listening.
And we're back. Thanks, Tom, for that great talk. Now we're going to switch over to our live Q&A portion of tonight's event. So let me just flick our screen first. Let me just set up my call here at the moment and get everybody up on your screen. Let me transition to here, turn everybody on. Everybody should be able to hear each other now. Perfect. So we're all live on screen. Well, thanks very much, guys, for your talks tonight. They are very interesting. So I have a first question up here for Nathan. Do you have to heat up the leather before you start working it? So the large sheet of leather itself, do you have to heat that or get that up to better temperature? And sorry, I've just muted myself and the guys couldn't hear me ask the question. Small technical blip there. So I'll ask it again. So Nathan, do you have to heat up the leather sheet that you're working with to get started?
I've never found that. Most of my leather is just done cold. So if you're going to, I wouldn't know why you'd heat up the leather. I've never heard of anyone doing it unless I'm missing a trick here. I'm only a newbie when it comes to leatherworking. There's probably an age-old man sitting there who's been making leather crafts for 20 years who's sitting there going, this boy knows nothing. But my experience is that you don't really need to heat it up. If anything, you're trying to do the opposite. You're trying to keep it cool. You're trying to keep it moist. And that's when you can start working with it. The only time you might want to start heating things up is when you're burnishing an edge. So I'll give an example here. So if you look at, like, I've made so many of these things that I'm kind of overthinking. But if you look at my apron, so all the different edges on that, you can either fold the edges, which are quite handy, or for this kind of thing, what you're basically doing is you're applying heat and friction. And what that does is it kind of seals in the sinews of the, because we're talking about flesh here. In a fancier way, we're calling it leather, but that's essentially what it is. We're sealing that in and we're basically hardening it and polishing it. And it gives a very nice, clean, polished edge. And you can go back over that with polishing agents and you can make these things look mwah. But that's the only time I know that you'd ever really need heat. And even that, all you need is friction. You know, you can... Running a lighter will do nothing. It's all about friction and pressure.
Okay. And then we have a question for Tom. Do you think that social media, YouTube, etc., has put pressure on us to be, quote, successful in what we do?
Yes, certainly in a way. I think it makes you think that you're not successful. As in, you look at somebody else's work. And there's a selection bias that you're not seeing, is that they've picked the best piece, the piece that they think is going to impress people the most and get the most likes, etc. And so what you see from 30 different makers is 30 great pieces. And you're looking at something you've created and thinking, I suck. This is trash in comparison. Where you don't see the 30 pieces of trash that they've all thrown away in the meantime. So I do this quite a bit. I do a talk where I bring like the horror shows, my worst pieces, and show them, and I pick them up and I go, look at this. I don't know what I was thinking. This would scare children. This is either a terrible piece of design or it's gone wrong and exploded on my lathe, and that's always fun. When something goes wrong at 2,000 revs per minute, it people talk about wood turning being a sedate hobby for old men, but you're like, yeah, you have a bolt explode on you at 2,000 revs and see how sedate you feel afterwards. So yeah, I think that to answer the question, yeah, I think there's a real danger that you look at social media and you look at groups for your particular craft and think, God, I'll never be that good. I'll never compete at that level, or I'll never produce something that looks like that. And that's a real danger, because your first piece won't look like that. Your first pieces won't look like that. It could be a year or two before your pieces look like that. You may never, because you may not have that skill to get to that level, but you will get better and better and better. And if you look at the end goal of somebody who's been doing it for 10 years and is putting up their best stuff, and you think, God, I won't do that today, then you're not going to go out and try today. So hence why I was saying, go out and say, I'm going to go out and I'm going to make an absolute mess. Nothing is coming out of today, except that what you'll find is you'll learn. You'll learn that leather works this way, or wood smashes that way, and so it's really important that we don't look at stuff that's produced on social media and go, oh well, that's the average person who's in this craft. They're the average piece that the average person produces, because it's not. It's the best people with their best stuff.
Okay. And do you feel that people self-censor too much along the same vein?
Yeah, I think people don't put up horror shows and don't put up failures, because they no, not many people. I'm kind of one of the exceptions, I suppose. Not many people want to show mistakes and show fails and show things going wrong. Like, even showing design fails is worse for me, because if something blows up on my lathe, it's kind of like, okay, so that was fun, right, for about half a second. But if I show a design fail, it's like, God, I thought this was good at one point. Like, at some stage, I put time into making this horror show, and that's bad. That means I'm a bad person. Right? So I'm much less likely to show a design fail than I am to show something that's gone wrong. So yeah, I don't think people want to go out, but it's very liberating. It's great to pick up something at a show, and I've done one in Dublin Maker where I picked it up and went, that would make children cry. Look at the state of that. What was I thinking? And it's wonderful to say that, because you go, right, well, the next thing will be better. It can't be as bad as that horror. Right? So yeah, I think people should put up the fails and go, and that's why I liked the letter was off on the lettering. I was like, yeah, great. You know what? Somebody who clearly knows what he's doing could actually make a cock like that. It's fine. Show it. Show the process. That's what it's about, right?
All right. Next question for you, Nathan. This person wants to know, have you combined leather and lasers? And if you've ever laser cut any leather?
You see, people have this weird idea about me, and they look at me and think, there's a man who likes to use heavy equipment and lasers. And that's absolutely a true thing to think about me. I've wanted to use lasers on it. I've seen people use lasers, and that you can put in, so if you've got the face of the leather, you could basically essentially burn in a pattern. You're not going to get an indentation on it, but you could burn in a pattern. You could cut edges and all the rest of it. And that is definitely a way you could go. I haven't seen many other people do it, but I definitely can imagine there's probably people who get kicks off doing it. Me personally, I don't know if I'd be into it. I kind of feel like with leather, you've got so much history of the craft that you can revert back to. You've got thousands of years of people mucking around with leather. So an awful lot of the kind of joy is on the carving aspect. And it's something I definitely want to get into, where people can carve intricate designs of dragons or kind of anything you can possibly imagine. You see ancient armor, they've got incredible stuff designed right into them. And I think if you bring a laser into it, which you definitely can, but it wouldn't be something that I'd want to replicate. If I'm going to mess around with lasers, there's so many other things I would do with that tool. And it's just not something that I would ever incorporate into my leatherworking. But if other people want to go for it, I have no problems hanging out and watching to see what happens. That'd be great fun. I love to burn things.
Jeff knows what those are.
Yeah.
I've put wood turning into lasers and lasered them. It's right, like there's my laser cutter right there.
Yeah, lots of safety, I see. Yeah.
yeah, tons. Yeah. One of my less nice failures was realizing that PVC, the polyvinyl chloride, the C stands for chloride, and you shouldn't laser it. I was like, that smells weird. Like, yeah, so yes, but I have done that too. Yeah.
When we were building the Tech Priest, I don't know, Tom, if you've ever seen the big Tech Priest I was working on in Tog. Anyone who walks into Tog, they just see this enormous, 8-limbed monster. And I remember the day I was there with, I think it was Duncan, and I was like, I need to bend all these pipes. And I was there like, how am I going to do this? And Duncan just comes out with a blowtorch and was like, it'll be grand. And we end up sitting there, and I'm like, geez, that's a very acrid smell. And Duncan's there like, it's fine, it'll be fine. And I remember thinking afterwards, like, that was probably not fine.
I remember walking the first day I walked into Tog, and on the wall in the old workshop they had the rules, and the first one was "Don't be on fire," and I thought these are my people. Like this, this is, and somebody was blow torching a marshmallow because of course they were, you know.
All right, the next question here is for you, Tom. You mentioned during your talk that you don't like to use harvested wood. Well, where do you find it? Do you wander the streets looking for bits of wood, or how does that work out?
Yeah, pretty much. The original dumpster divers are wood turners. So quite literally, I know men who drive BMWs who will drive past a skip, stop, get out, stick their heads into it, root around, find them, stick it in the boot of the car, and drive off. I will go to the beach, find, especially after a storm, anywhere that a tree is being cut down, there's a WhatsApp group for wood turners, and they'll be like, tree down in Griffith Avenue, because that's London Plain. It's quite a rare-ish wood. And they'll go down and they'll say to the chippers, will you cut that in a certain way for me? And I'll take it away. The monkey puzzle tree that fell recently in Cork, I put my name in to have a piece of that, and they agreed for me to have one, but it was this size, and I had to go to Cork to get it, and I don't drive, so unfortunately I couldn't get anybody there to move it for me. So yeah, you pretty much you pretty much just work with whatever you have. I like to anyway. I prefer that to taking professional blanks, partly because professional blanks are really expensive. People don't, people say, oh, but wood, it grows on trees. You're like, yeah, it costs a fortune. So, you see stuff, I've seen stuff on Etsy that's been sold for less than the blank would cost to buy. And you're looking at it going, well, there's a couple of hours work in that as well. So there's no chance of competing on that front. So I tend to work with what I find, and I tend to do one-offs. So I'm not a professional bowl turner. I'm not looking to turn 40 bowls tomorrow. I do pens is probably the most common repeated thing I do. And for that, you can find any piece of wood. I've used everything from whatchamacallits, not acorns, pine cones. With resin, I've used chips of wood. I've used trees, people's houses, branches from their houses. Everything and anything. I've put brass, all sorts of coppers and stuff into it as well. So yeah, I pretty much just it's more enjoyable for me to pick up a piece of wood and say, what can I make with this, or what's going to look cool, than to buy another bowl blank for 20 quid and turn that.
Okay. So I have another question here for Nathan. Louise wants to know, how long do you have to leave the varnish to dry before you end up sticking, in case you stick a whole book together and all its pages? So
I'll preface this with a story. I am an incredibly impatient person. I don't like to wait for anything. I'm all like, yes, let's do it right now, this second, as my long-suffering partner can attest to. And when it comes to leatherworking, the problem with it is you cannot rush it. You just can't, especially when you're dyeing and you're sealing and you're conditioning and you're oiling, or you're doing all these different steps. If you move too fast, you're just gonna make a muck of it. As Tom said, we often don't show the failures. I have bags of things in here, of things where I rushed and I've just made an absolute hames of. And anyone who says they don't have that wall of shame is a liar.
Lies.
Lies and falsehoods. But no, seriously. So like there's a thing that we like to talk about is the order of operations. So like if you're taking it, like I showed you, you go in this order, and that's the order you go in. Now some people might do in a little bit of a different order, but those people are trash, and I don't talk to those people. But like, there's a way of doing it. So like what I tend to do is if I would dye a piece, I tend to leave it overnight. Some people would swear that you don't need to do that. Personally, I do, because I've had situations in the past where I've dyed something, not waited the requisite amount of time, stuck a bit of a sealer on it,
other cedar that isn't Resolene on it, and then I banged it into a book. And I'll actually show you that. I've got my diary here where I've banged a couple of these in. And as you and like that's not even like there's another one, and it's just you can't rush it. You really can't rush it. That's me doing one after another. So generally what I like to do is if I'm dyeing something, I tend to leave it overnight. What I might do is I might condition it as it is wet, and kind of get it all stuck in together, and it kind of moves the dye around, and you can play around with it that way. But I tend to leave it overnight to dye, and then the next day I'd apply a coat of Resolene in the morning, and then I might apply another coat later on. I tend to do 2 coats. Resolene is kind of a new addition to me. Previously, I used this god-awful stuff for upholstery, which, is just awful stuff, and is definitely on my list of things you should never use, because it literally is just like liquid gunk, and you just kind of paint it on, and then it's just like, ugh, it's gross. But hence why I was so fanatical in my video that Resolene is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So to make a long story short, is I found that learning this whole craft has really taught me to kind of take my time and, do little bits at a time. But as a maker, I like to see myself very much as a generalist. I'm not just a leather worker. I'm not just a, I make massive costumes. I do fabric work. I do dioramas. I paint miniatures. I build furniture. I do an awful lot of different things. So what I tend to do is, if I'm really in the making mood, is I might work on a leather project and simultaneously work on another project. So I kind of move between one pretty seamlessly. Instead of focusing 100% on just one project. But again, other people are very much like, should be grand, or, they'll patiently wait. I tend to do something and then move on to the next thing, so I don't actually have to think about it too much. But hey, that's just me.
The woodturners have a received wisdom that says that lacquer will be dried 30 seconds after you touch it. Because we all do when you spray the lacquer on, you got to wait 15 minutes, a half hour or so. And you come back and you're like, I really want to get on with turning the next piece. And you're like, is this dry? Is this dry? It looks dry. You're like, it's not dry. And that's it. Now you have to sand it all off. And like you couldn't, the competition is so high in the nationals that if you had a finger smudge in it, you'd be laughed out of it. So yeah, the lacquer has to be seamlessly perfect. And you're sitting there for a half hour going, I really am behind and I need to move on. So yeah, I'm just the same. I'm very impatient.
I had a situation just a couple of months ago where I was making a diorama and I was pouring my first resin river, and I was like, this is going to be great. Everyone's going to think I'm the best thing since sliced bread. And I built my little banks and all the rest of it. And I was like, right, got to pour my resin in. I poured it in and I was like, yeah. And then I went out and I think I got some water or something, and I got a hobnob, and I came back in and I was like, oh my God. So I was there pulling out my glue gun, just like, oh my God, gluing everything in my room as resin leaked everywhere. I was thinking there like, oh my God, if anyone can see this. So like it was on like a Star Wars diorama I had. So it was like an AAT coming in, and like it was supposed to be like this lovely river, and it just ended up being this like shallow paddling pool. And every time, and like people were commenting on it, and they were like, that's really good, I like how you did the water. And I was there like, yes, it's by design, it's just I'm just a Renaissance man, I can do that. Sitting there being like, Jesus Christ.
All right, I have another question here for you, Tom. How much of the tools that you get do you modify to make for your own use? Someone noticed, was it a homemade vacuum pump you had?
Yeah, so yeah, I don't do an awful lot of that. Partly for health and safety reasons. You can't go mucking with high speed stuff if but I do bits and pieces of it. Wood turners are wombles basically. If they can bodge something together from wood, which is a very versatile, very strong material, then they'll do that. But I saw a demo from a guy in France who was carving and wood turning the most astonishing structures, like very alien Martian-like tree-like structures. And he had fashioned his own tools out of high-speed steel that he had in some way sanded or blowtorched them down to exactly what he wanted. And all of his tools were completely unique and all for a specific job. And that was very cool to kind of go and look at that and say, oh, that's for hooking in there because you need to pull back as the piece. But most of the time, no. Jigs and rigs for holding something while you're turning it, yeah, we do a lot of those. Measuring for cutting so that you get the same cut every time, just boom, 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 because you might have to cut a whole pile of pieces and you just want something that's the right size every time. So you'd make a jig, slap it wood in, through, next piece in, through, next piece in, through. And you might make those to order, like for a specific job. But as far as the tools go, no, because if they shatter, if they catch, or if they get caught in the machine or the machine hits them, you need something that's stronger than the machine, really, so that it doesn't chip or spark or. I mean, I wear a full head faceplate, the full Monty in protection and breath protection too while I'm turning, which is kind of overkill. But I've had enough things come off my lathe or split or explode that I even bring perspex with me when I'm doing demos because the guys in the club are like, we're not sitting in front of you if you're going to start turning. So I don't tend to make my own tools for the turning side of things, but certainly for measuring and jigs and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And the last question to Nathan, as he's claimed how much of a Renaissance man he is. They want to know about your knowledge of 3D printing. Have you ever made 3D printed stamps, the plastic stamps? Do you think they would work for the leather use?
Oh, well, I shot my mouth out there. I completely shot myself off. My relationship with my 3D printer is strained at the very best. I'd like to think I'm a great at these things, but my 3D printer absolutely hates me. But I have read an awful lot of people, and I've talked to an awful lot of people who have 3D printed stamps, often in ABS, and instead of you're going to get into that, so you're not going to heat that, obviously, so you're not going to get that kind of that crisp line we had on, where is it? Like the crisp line you're getting and stuff like that. You're just going to get more of an imprint. So an awful lot of people do is they'll have an arbor press, they'll 3D print it, quite 100% infill, usually with ABS, so it's super solid, and then they'll press it down into wet leather. And that, as I've seen, has worked quite effectively. Other than that, you can go on to Etsy and you can just commission someone to make it for next to nothing, and it'll turn up in the next few weeks. Or you can go even better and go to AliExpress and you can send them what you want, and then you may or may not get something similar in 3 or 4 months. But generally, these things, I've always had good luck with AliExpress for different things or really off-the-wall tools. If you don't need it right away, you just kind of put in the order, cross your fingers, and see what turns up. But you definitely can 3D print them. I've seen so many people do it. I've just never gotten around to it myself. My 3D printer is kind of sitting in the corner, a bit dejected, kind of breaking every time I try and use it. So I need to bring it into TOG and once things reopen and convince someone to take pity on me and help me fix it.
Okay.
I've got one thing I wanted to show you though before we go, because I didn't get a picture of this on the way
there's
in.
a dog.
Yeah,
Look at the dog.
That's my doggy dog. He's a cross. He's part beagle, part demon. He's being quiet at the moment, which is unusual, but however, this is a piece I wanted to show. It's basically a clock, as you can see.
Yeah.
But this is, if I turn it this way, you'll see that this is the remains. I turn it that way. The remains of a bowl that exploded. So this was a bowl. All the way around to here, and it failed. Funnily enough, it didn't fail at the rotted part because it's got kind of interesting figure here. Funnily enough, it didn't fail at that. It failed at a catch. I turned it badly and caught this, and the whole bowl blew apart. And this piece went flying across my workshop so fast it didn't drop in trajectory and hit every tool off of my wall, which will give you an idea of, you don't want to be in the way of it when it's doing that. And what was interesting was the other 2/3 of it remained on the lathe and is now doing this. And unfortunately, because it's out of whack, out of balance, the whole lathe begins to do this. And because it's going up and down, it begins to move in the workshop. And so what you have is a thing moving at 2,500 revs a minute. That's 2/3 of this. That's moving around the workshop while you're trying to get past it to hit the power button, which is why we always have a power button at either end of the workshop, so you can't be cut off from it. But that's the example of what I was talking about before. So this is now the stand for the clock, which I would never have thought of doing if this piece hadn't shot across my workshop and smashed itself. So, and I just didn't get a picture of that into the talk on the way. There you go.
So before we say goodbye to our viewers, do you each want to say where people can find out more about your work?
Tom, after you.
I'm on Twitter. So I used to be on Facebook, but I deleted my Facebook recently just out of disgust with them. So I'm at Devore on Twitter, and I put up stuff there whenever I turn.
Perfect. I guess you can catch me on my YouTube channel at Crafty Nathan's Creations, my Instagram at Crafty Nathan's Creations, Twitter, Facebook, pretty much everywhere. You can catch me anywhere, and I'm always kind of posting new creations. If I'm not doing leather work, I'm doing fabric work. If I'm not doing that, I'm doing an awful lot of dioramas. I actually got a actually I'll show you this. You guys might appreciate this. I got this custom made by a friend of mine. And everyone has seen the Bernie Sanders meme.
That is cool.
There's tiny Bernie Sanders. So I've got him to paint up. I've got a couple of dioramas in the works, and then I have a couple of bits of furniture that I'm excited to get finished off once we get back to the workshop. So if you want to follow more stuff like that, come hit me up on Instagram or on any other social media platform, and let's make together.
Thank you very much, Brody.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much.
So, thank you very much for joining us tonight for our stream. Thanks again to Nathan and Tom for giving the talks tonight. Our next streamed event will be on March the 4th. We'll have a special themed engineering night of talks, where a talk on various advances in AI, a talk on over-the-air updates for IoT devices, and Louise, who unfortunately couldn't speak tonight, will be speaking at our next event, talking about converting a laundry to a printing press. Thank you.